Francesco says, what are the pros and cons of a CCO project? Maybe you'll can tell people what CCO is, and then we'll wax poetic about pros and cons.
CCO, although more people have been saying CC0, which I guess is more technically accurate, is a type of, basically it means that a piece of intellectual property or anything doesn't have copyright associated with it. Nobody owns the copyrights to a thing. It's basically in the public domain. Anyone can do whatever they want, basically.
Stands for Creative Commons.
Yeah. A good example is like the works of Shakespeare. Anyone can do whatever they want in terms of releasing. If you want to go to a play of Romeo and Juliet, you don't need to get the permission from Shakespeare's estate or from Disney or from some company. But if you want to go and create a new Star Wars movie, you can't really do that without getting that.
There's a little bit of a difference, though. Let me just interrupt slightly, because those things are sort of what's called in the public domain, where at some point, maybe Shakespeare might be a bad example where it's so old that it was never really copyrighted. But a lot of stuff, there's like a copyright for it, a trademark. I shouldn't slam the table, probably. And somebody owns the rights to it, but after like 75 years or whatever, then it goes into the public domain, and then anybody can do it. Robin Hood's another example of just one of these old stories that anybody can adapt. But now in NFTs, we're seeing specific examples where people are creating the project and immediately releasing the rights of it to everybody under this Creative Commons license. So there's like a difference in the intention where right from the get-go, these projects are trying to put it out there, as opposed to some of these other IPs that just have transitioned into being in the public domain. Yeah.
So why would a project do this, for instance?
Well, I think one of the, it's so new that a lot of it is theoretical, but I think what a lot of people that are proponents of the idea are thinking that, if the intellectual property is at all interesting or compelling, other people will want to build on top of that. And that will just basically grow the public's affinity for that project in general. And, sort of the old world thinking is that the brand would get diluted or something like that by having other people work on it. But, the Web3 narrative is sort of that it can get built up by just having more people doing stuff with nouns and cryptodes, just as two examples that are trying to do that.
Yeah. And I often hear people say, like, why would a project do that? What isn't a lot of the value in holding sort of the copyright and the intellectual property for these projects? And one response to that is sort of what you said. Maybe by allowing anyone to create it will increase the public's affinity and the brand value and stuff, and like the original assets will go up in value. But also, some people aren't thinking about how can they maximize the profit of this thing. It's just like, this is a cool thing. We want to see it out there in the world and more people building on it. So let's just go CC0.
Yeah. On that note, I think one specific example that's sort of analogous that I've returned to, because sometimes people will be like, well, yeah, if you don't own it, how is it in any way valuable? And for instance, if you have one of the copies of the first appearance of any famous comic book character, Superman being in Action Comics 34, maybe was the issue, Spider-Man being in Amazing Fantasy 16, you don't own the rights to the character of Spider-Man just by owning that. But it's the inception of a very popular character, intellectual property, whatever you want to call it. And this is the sort of artifact that goes all the way back to the origination of it. And by being scarce, because there's not that many of them because they're old, and being verifiable and all that stuff that NFTs already have built into it, it's just a valuable thing for collectors to own. And so in that sense, it makes plenty of sense to me that a CC0 NFT could be very valuable despite conferring no ownership rights over the intellectual property if that intellectual property becomes popular. Just one more level to it, though, is that, with these comic book examples, you're owning one of, 10,000 of the first copies of Spider-Man. Whereas with the NFTs, you would be owning Spider-Man, this cryptode, for instance, if it somehow became a very popular figure in popular culture, you're not just owning the first story of it, you're owning it. And again, you don't have to own the intellectual property by owning the NFTs for that to be a valuable collector's item to people who care about the character.
Yeah. No, that's a great analogy. Some of the cons I think that I've heard and can agree with are if sort of say there's a very specific vision for the brand that maybe the creators have and they have sort of the ability to execute on that, it can be sort of detrimental to have people out there building conflicting intellectual property and stories. Like, for example, Cool Cats, they're very family friendly. They're going for like, kid friendly. Maybe they do a kids TV show. It would be damaging if there's someone out there doing like some murder horror, thing with Cool Cats as the intellect. It would potentially be detrimental to like the brand, and it would be confusing for like fans and for people going, well, what is Cool Cats? There's this horror Cool Cats show and there's this. But
that's valid. That's a con to, applying CC0 to some project that doesn't even that's not going to do it. What about the concept of the negative or the cons of using CC0 on a project that actually is CC0 and sort of wants to let other people do it? You know what I mean? To me, you can have a similar thing to where you're talking about like murder Cool Cats or whatever.
Right.
But for instance, any of these CC0 projects, people could just use it to spew all sorts of terrible hate or whatever and go, we love Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and have it coming out of a cryptode's mouth or something. People might think that's damaging. That in that sense, just anyone being able to do something and you not having a legal recourse to stop them from using your imagery in it can have some sort of a negative effect.
Yeah, definitely. That's another danger. And it's, that's just one thing that can happen by going CC0. You basically relinquish all legal control and rights to stop that from happening.
Right. One thing that could be bad about it is, for instance, you're Dom Hoff, right? And you've got these blit maps and you make them CC0. If you want to make official blit map merchandise, for instance, it's easier to make a knockoff. I mean, again, this kind of just goes back to the legal thing, but the idea of being able to charge a premium for like a real Prada bag versus a knockoff Prada bag makes more sense to me than to be able to charge a premium if you're Dom Hoff trying to sell Blitmap merch versus other Blitmap that has an equal legal footing to be putting out Blitmap merch. It's harder to actually say that mine is better or more official. Even if it is technically more official, it's like the point of what you're doing is that we're all officially able to use this IP. So why do I need yours? You can kind of get railroaded if you still, like if you're doing CC0 and trying to just totally step back and go, it's in everybody else's hands, fine. But if you still are trying to like guide it a little bit, you're sort of handcuffing yourself a little bit maybe when you do CC0,
not CC0.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like you said at the beginning, it's something that's quite new and we haven't really seen it play out. And it's probably going to take many, many, many years before we can look back and say, oh, it was probably a good decision for this project to do it. It may have been a bad decision for this project to do it, and so on and so forth.
As far as NFTs are concerned, I feel like we haven't really seen the just the results basically of CC0 or non-CC0 intellectual property. Like it's just all so new that almost every implementation of this intellectual property is just like more NFTs or like just there's only been a little bit built on top with this. There's some merch obviously for various projects, but it's still like we don't have any Netflix shows or anything like that from NFT based intellectual property. So we really can't say what are the in practice, pros and cons. We can only kind of wax poetic about theoretically what does this enable and what does it hinder, and kind of assume how that may or may not play out in the future.